Hello, my friends. It's a time of division. A dark power is rising that will shape the galaxy for the next 20 years and destroy a legacy. No, I'm not talking about American politics. I'm talking about the Clone Wars. And let's start it off with a guy that's very serious, General Grievous. See what I did there? Was a little too on the nose for you. OGG was a blast to paint, and it allowed me to experiment a little. Who is your favorite separatist? I'm leaning a little more towards Wat Tambor for myself. I kind of like his crazy voice and his little dials when he talks. Let me know below. So after assembling our miniature and giving old Metalhead a gray primer, why not go ahead and start off with something gray? And for that, let's use some VMC Vallejo Model Color German Gray. Any parts of the Mini that are going to be metallic will get covered with this. That'll include the neck, the elbows, shoulder socket, thighs, calves, feet, and hands. Why gray and not black? For one, gray is easier to cover than, like a solid black would be. And it's not as dark, and since these areas are metal, we want to be able to get into, like a lighter gray in the end. And moving on to the metallics, we're going to be using some Scale Color 75 heavy metal here. There's only two areas to cover here. That's going to be the pistol and the handle of the lightsaber. These are also, by chance, the only areas you're going to need to shade because of the brightness of the metallics. You could go with a darker metallic to start off with, or add in a little bit of black to this and then come back and highlight it with the straight heavy metal. But I chose to just go ahead and, base it in the heavy metal, shade it, and then clean it back up again. Now for all the non-metallic areas of his body, which would be like his, I guess you could call it his plastoid armor. At first I had started painting these areas in a brown, a brown shade, something along the lines of US brown. But I decided it really wasn't dark enough for me. And my intention here was to go with a dark color in the beginning so as not have to add any shade later on to the Mini. And overall I would get, a cleaner looking miniature, by just using base colors and highlights. So for his body and his head, like I said, all the areas that are not metallic, you're going to want to mix the US brown, which it's like a mid-tone brown. It's not very dark, but you're going to want to mix that in with some black or with the German gray to really saturate it, and bring the color down. And while we're letting his body dry, why not go ahead and start on the cape? And for the inside of the cape, we're going to want to use a dark red color. You can take a flat red or other red style, brighter reds, and add in some black or German gray to bring the color down. I chose to just go ahead and start out with a heavy red. That's in the Vallejo Extra Opaque line. It's pretty dark to begin with, and it covers really well. So let's go ahead and get started on his outer shell body color. Using that same US brown German gray color, we're going to add in a little bit of ivory or an off-white or even white gray color. You're going to add that to your brown gray mix and start highlighting the body armor. This is basically our, well, it's not our base color, but it's more like our true color here, I guess you could call it. You know, the base of the base on the primer. So do not add, don't add too much white to this. You don't want to overpower it too quickly. Maybe just just a little bit on the end of your brush, or about half a drop worth if you're using dropper bottles. And that way, if you don't want to have to start this process over again, like I said. So just don't add too much white right off the bat. And we're going to keep continuing on with his armor here real quick. We're going to add in another drop or two of ivory. This is your, I guess you could call it your base highlight color. You're still going to be covering probably 50 to 70% of the previous color here. Focusing on the areas that need the most light. I also make a lot of use of his cape, plopping it on his shoulders, helping me find my shade and shadowed areas to make sure I don't put the highlights in the wrong spot. And the cape actually sits pretty squarely on him and doesn't fall off, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. Now using the straight US brown and ivory, we're going to pretty much repeat all the steps, really focusing on those raised areas, especially his head, shoulders, chest piece, and forearms. Start working on your edge highlighting here more. Now with just straight ivory, we're going to be giving his body some pop, hitting those sections again, doing some extreme highlights. Remember, don't go too overboard here. You don't want to cover up too much of the previous steps we've already done. Now let's get back to working on that cape. With that heavy red that we used earlier, mix in a little bit of bloody red or say flat red. Just something that's a little bit brighter, and let's sort of dry brush, wet brush this on the inside of his cape. And then after that, add a little bit of light red or something along those lines to this to give it just slightly more pop. Really try not to go overboard here, as this is going to be the inside of this cape, and a lot of it's going to be considered to be in shade anyways. Now while we let his cape dry, let's move on back to the body. We're going to do about a 50-50 mix or so of German gray and neutral gray and start working on those metal areas. Remember to leave the recess and areas of shade in the base color. Now we're going to come back with just some straight neutral gray and repeat the previous steps, doing our best to leave a little bit of the previous mixture showing. Continuing to work on our highlights, now adding light gray into our neutral gray. Let's repeat the previous steps, remembering to color less and less as we go along. This is going to be your main highlight color from here. And one last time, this time with straight light gray. This is going to be for all your extreme highlights and edging. All the areas you just worked on, so go slow, take your time, so we don't want to goof up any areas and have to go back over areas we've already done at this point. Moving back to his cloak with some heavy green or any other desaturated green color you have. You could use, I guess, a black green here. And we're going to be coloring the outside of his cloak only. Now, after we give that a moment or two to dry, let's add in some deep green or other mid-tone green to the heavy green and color the folds and the top race sections. Remember that You also have to remember that the heavy green dries super matte most of the time. So it might look really flat to you, and you feel like you just need to go over it and over it again to try and get a shine to it. But resist that urge. It'll come out really clean in the next section. Don't worry about it. So now we're going to be using some straight deep green here, and we're going to be doing our best to cover about 90 to, or 80, I say 80 to 90% of the previous steps. You also need to remember that this might still dry a little bit matte because we're still just covering up an area that we did in the heavy green, but it won't be as bad as the two previous steps. So just take your time, give it a moment. Now it's time to give that cloak a little bit of pop. And for that, we're going to be using pale green or some other light green color of your choice. And we're going to edge highlight the folds, the top and the outsides of the cloak. You might want to do this twice depending on how bright you really want these highlights to be. Because once again, we are still covering over that heavy green, and it can be a pain in the butt sometimes. So don't be afraid to go over this once or twice. You know, just remember to use a thin brush. Take your time. Don't spill over. Now, while we got that cloak in our hands, we're going to want to use a more desaturated metal color. For that, I have used Skull Color Black Metal, and he's got these little clasps on his cloak there. So you're going to come in, you're going to hit it with the darker black metal, blow on it for a second or something, give it a moment to dry, then come back and hit it with the shinier heavy metal color. So deciding that I really felt like giving George the middle finger, I went with the purple lightsaber. For that, you pretty much, well, depending, I would say it doesn't matter what color you want your lightsaber to be. You need to base it in a solid white color, right? That way, any color that you're putting on top of it can really get that glowing effect, especially if you can glaze this on properly. So after you put the white on, give it a moment to dry. You know, find the color you want, thin it down, put some glaze medium in it or something, and you know, give the saber a swipe. You know, from the top to the bottom. Blow on it, something. Give it a moment to dry. Don't go right back at it again. And then, you know, repeat that step a couple times, remembering to blow on it or give it a second to dry, because if you don't, you're just gonna, if you rush this, you're gonna screw it up. It's not gonna look right. And to be honest, this is the most important part of this figure. So after we let that saber dry for a moment, go ahead and add his cloak and the head. Base the mini in a fashion to match your army. Seal him with some matte varnish for protection. And you're ready to rule the galaxy one Roger droid at a time. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. So remember to like, subscribe, and share to help my channel grow. If you enjoy my videos and want to see me continue producing content, please consider supporting my channel via Patreon or the PayPal link below. Also, if you have any suggestions, things you want to see painted, have questions, please leave a comment below or find me on Facebook. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.